Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's webinar. It's a beautiful day outside, and I'm delighted to welcome you all. I hope it's going to be beautiful whether you're watching live or watching recorded afterwards. I'm Rob Eveleigh, Managing Director of Brightelm.
Hi, and I'm Gabrielle Mouterde. I'm the Events Manager at the International Society for Obstetrics and Gynecology. And together with Rob, I'm going to be your co-host today through the presentations and topics. We're discussing getting value from your sponsors in virtual events.
Today's webinar is being broadcast and recorded using the Zoom platform, which I'm sure you're all familiar with now. However, today we're using it in combination with the Open Audience engagement platform. Open Audience is a standalone browser-based platform with some great functionality, and they've kindly allowed us to use it today, as, let's be honest, the Zoom version isn't great. So if I could ask you all, please, to go to your computers, your smartphone browser, and type in C Open Meet, and I'll bring that up on the screen for you. That's copenmeet.com, and you should be able to see the link on your web portal now, if you'd like to log on to there. So we'll start by doing a test question first. And if you could please tell us, how did you travel to the meeting today? That's great, thank you very much. Jason, my colleague who's operating Open Audience today for us. So 32% came via internet, 19% via spacecraft, which is a wonderful mode of travel, 13% by jet ski, and by far the most popular, 36% walked from the lounge. I hope you enjoyed and took the time to enjoy your commutes this morning. The next question, do you represent an association, PCO, supplier, or something else? And these questions are just going to give us a bit of an idea about the audience who we have attending today. We'll give that a few more minutes just to settle. But it looks like we have around 40% associations, 32-33% PCOs, that's professional conference organizer, 16% suppliers, and the rest other. And finally, for the moment, if a virtual event is defined as one that represents a live conference online, which of the following statements do you agree with? A, I have never organized an online event. B, I have organized webinars before, but nothing bigger. C, I've organized virtual events. And D, I have organized virtual events and they have had sponsors. Now, just to clarify, the definition of a virtual event is one that represents a live conference online, not a webinar. So, okay, so we've got a lot of people who have never done an online event before. That's great. And equally popular people who've organized webinars, but nothing bigger. So it sounds like there's a bit of appetite for adventure out there and scalability, perhaps. A few people have organized virtual events, and a few people have done the whole thing already, and perhaps they're looking to improve, perhaps, or find new ideas. If you'd like to ask us or our speakers a question, please use the Q&A button in Open Audience, and it's down at the bottom left-hand side of the Open Audience screen. We will try and answer all your questions either live or written. If someone has already asked your question, please use the upvote tool so we can see which are the most popular. The chat function in Zoom is available if you'd like to make general comments and network amongst yourselves, but we will not be monitoring it. And just a reminder that the session today is being recorded and it will be available after the event online, or I will email those who have opted in. Gabrielle.
Okay, so today's webinar is going to last about an hour until about 11 British summer time. If we have a lot of questions, we're going to stay about 15 minutes longer to have some sort of bonus material and really go into some of those questions, because we'll try and finish on time, so please feel free to leave at 11 or stay over for a bit longer. As Rob says, there's opportunities to ask questions, and also on the open audience, it actually translates questions. So if you want to write in your native language, it will translate it. So Rob and I are going to be joined by 3 speakers today, and also Jason, who'll be helping us out on open audience. So let me introduce everybody. So we've got Delores Cantello. She's the Global Marketing Manager in Obstetrics and Gynecology for Philips. She's based in Malaga. She's a professional coach as well, Master of NLP, and currently enrolled in a 3-year program to become a Gestalt therapist. Hope I said that right. Gosh, that must keep you busy, Delores.
It does, but I everything that you do with passion it's like time flies.
Yeah, I completely agree. Next we have Pritesh Mawdia. He's the Head of Technical Support and Development at event tech firm Shocklogic. He's based in London. Pritesh and I have worked together for a long time. I understand you were one of the founding members of Shocklogic. Gosh, you might have seen like incredible changes over the years.
It's been phenomenal. I started back in 2006, and to watch the evolution of events grow from small meetings to large conferences to now virtual events, it's been extraordinary.
Yeah. All right, it's great to have you on the panel, because I know that you know lots about virtual events and have been doing them for a long time. And the final panelist is Caroline MacKenzie, who is the Director and Owner of Global Association Partners, Operations Director of Open Audience, and is based in Scotland. And I also understand, not only with those 2 jobs, that you've also been becoming an expert sewer of scrub wash bags and care staff face masks. That's incredible.
Well, I think one of the things in these times that many find unsettling is having extra time on your hands, and as event planners and organisers, it's not something we're used to, and a bit of variety adds to the keeping the brain material sane. Ish.
Definitely. And the last person we've got to introduce is Caroline's colleague, Jason Davenport. He's a Digital Solutions Manager at Open Audience, and he's running our Q&A poll today.
Good morning. How is everybody?
Yeah, good. Okay, so Rob, do you want to say a few words, or do you want me, Delores and I, to start our...
We've actually got a couple of initial questions, which I'll just cover off just before we go into the first session. The first question is, how many people are online? So the answer is currently around 150, sorry, and that's just over 50% of the people that registered. This is a free event, so I expected that to happen. The second question is, why use OpenMeet for polls and Q&A rather than the features in Zoom? Basically because the polling features in Zoom are really quite poor. They do lots of other good things as well. We also like to try new platforms. So there's another question just in what's the advantage to see OpenMeet to Slido. I will send out the contact details for OpenMeet, the Open Audience afterwards, and you can ask them. I think they're the best people to answer that. Back to you, Gabrielle.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to start to share my screen. Okay, so as Rob, the poll this morning was really good to see where we are on our virtual journey, and I think everyone's in different places. Some people have been doing it a very long time and want to know more, and I think it's really important about everyone we're taking on this virtual journey. So we know that we have to consider committees and trying to convince them that it's the way forward. Members as well, it's really important that they join the journey and we really explain how we're reaching our decisions and why we're choosing them. Staff as well, that's always important. Some people are technophobes. Our sponsors and exhibitors, and also our suppliers, we shouldn't forget them. But today we're going to be talking about the sponsors and exhibitors. And one of the things I just want to recap on what we said last week. So we were talking about programs and how that if you take an on-site program and you just put it virtually, it's not going to work. I think everyone in the industry is quite clear on that. But I also think that it's the same with exhibition and sponsorship. Just taking your industry prospectus, putting it online and just putting E's in front of it. So e-symposium, e-hospitality suite, e-charging station, that's just not going to work. And you really need to rethink about how people consume content online, what are the additional options, what really doesn't work, and to help you with that is to start to have conversations with the people who it's going to affect, which is sponsors. And that's why I'm really pleased to have one of our sponsors who's online to talk about her goals and her objectives, and for us to have a bit of a Q&A about some of the big questions that we have. So I'm going to pass over to Delores. And you're just on mute.
Sorry, I'm gonna go quickly and share then my screen, or shall we continue with yours? Thank you very much. So a pleasure to meet you, and I hope that what I have to say about needs and objectives is also something that you recognize as your needs and objectives. So for the next slide, I listed a little bit the needs, and obviously we all have a marketing plan and we all have all these processes that we go through. And I think one of the first needs is basically to be aligned with our needs, the need creation that we have foreseen, and the objectives that we have set ourselves, be it strategic marketing goals or according to our marketing plan, and also marketing tactics. But in a very general way, I think that we have to have a platform or a space that allows us to have a fruitful gathering with customers that we already have, or to create new quality prospects with new customers. So therefore, location, the accessibility, the program offering is really important, as well as to ensure that we have enough time to have quality talks and exchange with the companies that are coming, with the physicians, or in our case, that are coming to see our booth. I think that we also have to, another important thing is that you have to have a really good program that justifies the expense that the visitors is going to put in, so everybody attending, but also us as industry partners, that it is interesting enough that you would get all these quality contacts. And also an important thing when you talk and cooperate with the industry organizers, like we, for example, we have different ones, be it cardiology or obstetrics and gynecology or radiology. So there has to be a freedom to implement activities in which the industry partners can show and prove the uniqueness of the offering. So it has to be, there needs to be a space within or also outside of the scientific program to do so. I think that's the basic needs that everyone probably can relate to. And the other important thing is that we have a voice and a weight, that we interact as really truly partners with the organizers, so that we can exchange ideas about for current and future improvements. However, given the healthcare scenario that we're living through right now, I think we are seeing a shift of needs, and we have to look into the company guidelines, the health authority guidelines, and the corporations guidelines that will probably influence, like, what are we going to do with exhibitions now. I think we also have to look into what is the positioning of the different society members, and I mean like the committees of the different societies, as well as the exhibitors and also the companies, and how they allowed to travel, or whether the hospitals say, no, you're not allowed to travel. So I think that is something that we need to consider. And there will be probably also different expectations now. So what are those? What are the future reasons to attend a Congress? How will that change the new healthcare environment? And how much does the availability and the possibility to have an online and virtual information influence the attendees or create different expectations for the events? So I think that's what we need to consider when we think about shifting needs. And about objectives, obviously, as a company, you have your marketing plans and you have to deliver on the marketing plans and the specific Congress objectives that you have defined. But in generic terms, I think that you want to have a lasting positive impact on existing and potential new customers. You want to create new business prospects and new contacts and that result into business. And obviously to have a face-to-face interaction, but that needs to be more meaningful to the event attendees. I think that's more or less.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Delores. I think it's really good to know what your objectives and your goals are, because then we know what's really important and how we need to change what we're offering to make sure that you achieve those goals and objectives, even in a virtual setting, or even primarily starting with a virtual setting. So I have some questions prepared that I want to ask you.
Okay.
And I'm going to do my first one. So how, because I'm sure this is a question we're going to be asking a lot of sponsors, how has COVID-19 affected your company?
Well, there are different effects. But if I stay purely on the exhibition part line, I think that, so as a company, we have canceled all events until end of June to see like what is happening. That's on an international level. There are certain countries that said like we don't do any congresses and any gatherings until the end of the year. So I think that depends also on the different country organization. And then there's obviously also the other fact in terms of respiratory equipment, et cetera, that is evolving really, really rapidly and really. But from an exhibition point of view, I'd say that until June on an international level, until July, it has been cancelled. And there's an incredible demand about doing virtual meetings and online meetings.
Great. So you can attend virtual meetings, but you can't, up until June, do on-site.
Correct.
And I'm just going to push a bit further on that question about in virtual meetings. Can you guarantee virtual meetings during that time?
Can I guarantee? Well,
or like, can you invest in virtual meetings during that time?
That's the big question, basically. No, so that is a bit of dilemma that I am in right now. So what is the budgetary reality? So if we think we have a Congress at the end of the year, and I would like to plan for that. However, if I have to consider the virtual reality that is coming towards me and the requests that we're having, I probably have to think of like, maybe I cannot spend as much for the actual physical face-to-face event and need to invest a certain part into the virtual part to be fair.
Yeah, because that's one thing that's really important to remember, is that people have one pot, and really that has got to be distributed throughout that whole year, and then you've got to make judgment calls. And I think that's that we really need to kind of keep in mind when we're speaking about this and what we're offering for the year and the year plan, even though most of our year plans have gone out the window.
Yes.
What's the first thing that comes to mind when I say virtual meeting?
The first thing that comes into my mind is the things that we constantly do, which is like all this video conferencing and telephone conferencing. And then it drags me really back in time, where we had like a satellite symposium that was really satellite transmitted, and you would have people in the room and they were all looking into that. And nowadays, I think it is part of our reality, and I think it's a reality that's here to stay, because we've seen that there is quality in the information that you can provide, and I think it's here to stay. So I think it's a new environment. that we have to get to learn, and it's here to stay. I'm convinced about that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think there's always going to be an on-site need, but I think to reach these larger audiences, and we might get really comfortable now with these global audiences that we can reach, who maybe aren't going to be able to follow us on site. So I think we always need to take that. I think I completely agree. So what has put your virtual meetings in the past? Like when you saw the value, that you didn't feel the value there, or there was something that was stopping you?
I think it's probably the unknown. So the unknown, so it's one thing when you interact within a company and you're used to doing that and you don't even need to see the faces. However, when you are there as a exhibitor, as a sponsor, there's an expectation of like an exchange, and that the face-to-face gives you also this feeling of like, what is it now? So, and I think that that's something that we haven't been doing in the past, that we did several tries at certain congresses. For example, at RSNA, there was like a little robot that we used, and that you would basically be able to ask specific questions to a specialized person and a clinical person located somewhere else. However, there was never the response also from the attendees to say like, oh, this is really exciting. So there was this gimmick of the new. However, the response from the audience was never as strong towards it. So I think that that is maybe something in the backburner of the mind of saying like, what will be the response? So that's why we did not really do as heavily into virtual meetings so far.
Definitely, and you know, one of the things, you know, it's demand breeds necessity, and if there isn't a demand there for it, sometimes that gets put to the side, right?
Yeah.
So my next question, so in our industry prospectus,
okay,
say that by attending our Congress, you will be able to reach key opinion leaders and decision makers in the field, expand your network with valuable contacts, nurturing existing relationships, demonstrate your company's product and leadership, raise brand profile and loyalty, and establish strong market position by exhibiting. But in a virtual setting, in your opinion, which ones are the most important and which ones won't work?
In a virtual,
yeah,
I think you still want to expand your network, and obviously and nurture existing relationships. I think that is really, really important one. I think what we might not get necessarily is the loyalty part of it, because it has its pros and its cons. So I think like you may expand the network because the shyness that some people may have to walk onto the booth of somewhere is gone, because it's in a virtual space. It's not anonymous, is that the word?
Yeah.
And so you know, it's anonymous, so I can go there, and it takes that away, this shyness basically. So that is good, but I think that when it comes to loyalty, at the same time, it's not necessary to be loyal anymore to a specific brand, because I'm not being seen anyhow, so I can just try something else. So I think that is a bit, that probably might get lost.
Okay, because I'm conscious of time, I will do the last question, I think, right, Rob? Yeah.
Yeah, and then I've got a question from our audience.
Brilliant. Okay, so do you think virtual exhibitions work?
In my mind, when I say virtual exhibitions and I imagine like the systems there and everything,
be honest.
No, no, and probably has to do with the reality that basically it's so easy to reach out and to have a one-on-one discussion with the people that you know already. So I think like really to sit in front of my PC to see a system or some, no, I can do this via you. No, I can do it via YouTube if I want to.
Well, I think this is where, no, I think there is lots of things out there in the exhibition we can do so much on, and I'm not going to talk about it too much because I know that Rob is going to touch on virtual exhibitions and what will be fun, and I know that it's going to be our job to convince you.
So I'm open-minded, so I look forward to the arguments and the reasons.
And I think it's really important that you say you don't think it works, or you're unsure about how it's going to work, because this is really, you know, what a lot of people are going to be thinking, a lot of sponsors. I think if we ignore this fact, then we're putting our head in the sand and we're not going face on that actually we need to demonstrate this value.
And maybe, probably it's like, it has to do with not knowing enough about it as well. I'm not a gamer, so maybe then my fantasy would drive me somewhere else.
And I think that's where we need to provide more information and maybe do a virtual industry prospectus, or like a presentation of our prospectus, to really talk people through what the changes and what the platform will look like. So I'm going to skip have I missed anything, because I know that Rob's consciously has got some questions, and I'm just going to say a big thank you for being honest with all your answers and coming in and sharing your opinion with us.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
No problem. I think we've got some questions. So, Rob?
Yeah, thanks very much. So just to re-clarify a couple of things, slides from presenters will be available on the Brightelm website from Monday onwards, and I will send out a link to that to everyone who opted in after the meeting. The question we have, which is actually the most popular, has currently got 9 upvotes. I'm going to ask Delores, when you are sponsoring virtual meetings, what sponsorship items do you think have the biggest potential impact?
Well, in all honesty, I haven't sponsored yet a virtual event. If we have organized something, we have done it as Philips ourselves. So there was no sponsorship included for that. And I cannot say what is the most important one. Obviously, I think the most important indicator for us would be attendance, time of the attendance, and also the contact after that once, in terms of what is the feedback to the content provided.
Okay, thanks. We're going to move on now. Thank you very much, Doris and Gabrielle. We're going to move on to me, actually. So I shall now share my screen.
So I think we've now found from the objectives and concerns from sponsors, and now it's to look at technologically what's possible, which is the time to get us all excited about all the possibilities are out there, and there are lots of opportunities. So I'll pass over to Rob.
Thanks so much. I have a quick question for everybody, actually. First of all, what's the biggest challenge you have in getting corporate stakeholders to support your virtual meetings? That's an open question. So
okay. Well, I would probably say it's a lot.
Oh, sorry, Gabrielle. It's a question for the audience.
Ah, right. Okay.
On open audience.
Rob, could you stop sharing, and then I could share the broadcast of it?
Yeah, of course I can. There we go. Actually, Jason, I think we'll come back to the results of that at the end, because it's quite like people to think about it a little bit first of all. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. So thinking along the lines of last month's webinar, which is available on our website and on YouTube, when we need to start working with sponsors with virtual formats, what actually works and what doesn't work. So traditional one-to-many seminars would seem to translate well in this sort of webinar format. Plenty of platforms can show a live speaker image and slides. And things like expert briefings would also work quite well, because they're along this idea of one-to-many, even one-to-one interviews. And these are all things that sponsors will pay to deliver as part of your event. I tend to call these type of events broadcast events, and those are the ones which are mostly one-way communication to an audience, rather than a general discussion, Q&A and polling. whether integrated or using a separate application, the technology is developed to a stage where it can really enhance the value of an event. And I'd go as far to say that technology like this actually produces better quality questions. Some attendees will never want to put their hand up and ask often very pertinent questions. So it's a very valuable format for sponsors. And this form also works well for extended versions of broadcasts, such as panel discussions. Now, obviously, if there's no live event, there's probably not going to be a printed program. So what are the alternatives? If we take YouTube's lead, they seem to have mastered the idea of splicing adverts at the front and end of videos and midway. So why shouldn't we as event organizers be able to do that too? Imagine the value to a sponsor of running a 30-second video advert in the time immediately leading up to the launch of a webinar, which is the time when most people have joined, that last 30 seconds before you go live. Or another idea from TV, why not take a commercial break halfway through and show a couple of adverts, particularly if you are running longer sessions, more than an hour. Some research was published recently to say that actually people's concentration time on digital events is limited to 15 minutes before they start to get distracted. So it is important to give the opportunity for breaks. And with enough time and data, of course, it would be possible to mail out flyers or letters in advance of your event and use it as an opportunity for perhaps gamification or something similar. Can you send an email from your sponsor to all the attendees at their session post-event with a special offer, for example? Again, sponsors will pay for those sort of opportunities. Depending on your organization, product endorsements may also be appropriate. Now, of course, I'm not saying that all of these will work for every virtual event. And as Caroline will mention, compliance issues with medical events, medical orientated events, may stop some of these things happening. And no one wants to sit through an hour of pitches. We've all been there and done that. But the point I'm trying to make here is that there is value in being creative and thinking a little differently about advertising. Let's talk about networking and what do we mean by virtual networking. I don't know about you, but I find networking in a live setting a bit difficult sometimes, especially if I don't know anyone. Walking into a room full of people that I don't know, half of which are trying to pitch something to me, can feel very intimidating. And I often feel a bit like the picture shown here, that you've got a lot of people suddenly in your face. However, for sponsors and exhibitors, dedicated networking time is an incredibly valuable opportunity. So the key here for me is to be innovative. Many virtual event platforms have rooms set aside for networking. Some even have networking tables where people can sit, I use in inverted commas, with a random stranger and open a conversation. But through all the demonstrations I've sat on, particularly those in the last couple of months, I'm struggling to see anything that really replicates true live networking. That is until a couple of Fridays ago where I attended a virtual Friday drinks run by an art centre local to me in Bristol, who are actually on today's call. They've developed their own platform which allows random connections in pairs amongst a group of pre-registered attendees. Each connection consists of a 5-minute one-to-one discussion with a stranger, which isn't a lot of time, but actually when it turns out it's plenty of time for a brief introduction. And you get a 30-second and 10-second warning towards the end. There was even a built-in panic button in case anyone felt harassed, which I think was a brilliant idea. My experience was it was very much a speed networking event without the obvious need to move around tables. But I was really impressed by the innovation that was shown by the team, particularly when I discovered they developed it themselves. So just on networking, I believe that valuable networking can be possible through electronic platforms, but it's important to try and think about the networking experience and trying to emulate the physical experience as much as possible. The last subject I'd like to discuss, which we've touched on already, is virtual exhibitions. Now, I remember seeing my first virtual exhibition demo about 10 years ago and thinking, well, that'll never happen. And now look where we all are. We are actually considering it, and lots of live exhibitions and virtual exhibitions are taking place. This screenshot here is actually courtesy of vFairs, which is one such platform. Another is iVent. Now, whilst I know they're not everyone's cup of tea, there are some incredibly innovative platforms in the marketplace, and there is some amazing functionality. The functionality you can see nowadays include pre-posting videos, online literature, PDF downloads, but they're going so far as to have live chat opportunities, video chat opportunities, which I think are incredible, and even a meeting booking service. The environment, they're really making great strides in the replication of exhibition environments. And a note on that, if you are planning to run a virtual exhibition, start small, because in the same way as with a live event, large exhibitions can have footfall problems. The larger you make an online exhibition, the harder it is for people to get around all of the stands. So if you are starting off, do make it small, make it limited. In one way, a virtual exhibition is a marketer's dream. As we were talking in our rehearsal yesterday, it actually gives the opportunity for salespeople not to stand on the edge of the exhibition stands trying to pounce on unsuspecting buyers as they wander past. So it can become a true choice and buying experience for the buyer, rather than the feeling of being coaxed in. The data collection opportunities are massive around virtual exhibitions, and a lot more detailed than is available in live events. Yes, we have RFID now, but data collection for virtual exhibitions allows us to know who's visited what, who's even passed by a stand, who's clicked what, who's downloaded a PDF, watched a presentation, as well as those who have interacted in person with the stand. And the last thing to consider, of course, which is a huge opportunity for sponsors, is that cost. There's a massive reduction in costs. There's no expensive build, no staff out of the office, and no hotel or travel costs. So from a formats perspective, there are many ways and many more platforms than there are ways available to support your sponsors and exhibitors. It's just about finding what really works for you and your stakeholders, and of course, not forgetting your attendees. As I often say to my clients, your members need your industry partners in order to be able to do their jobs. So try to create as many opportunities for them to interact as practically possible. So we're going to, Gabrielle, do we have, or do you or anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, there have been a few questions. I think one was about the budget of all of these. Yeah, so what they should think about when first approaching it in terms of budget, these different options.
It ranges massively. It all depends on scale and functionality. The best platform that I think the lowest common denominator, which is good because I don't do anything that I wouldn't support anything that's less than good, would need a budget of around £5,000. And that's the simplest platform, up to for a big virtual exhibition. There are packages available starting from £8,000. Obviously, the bigger you get, the more complex it is, the higher the cost, and the cost really comes from the time needed to build the platforms. So it's not just a case of buying a platform and going, oh yeah, that getting all the exhibitors to fill out their profiles. A lot of work needs to be done in order to design it in a way which is going to work for you. So from £5,000, I had an inquiry earlier this week for a multi-site virtual event for around 40-50 sites earlier this week, and probably we're looking at in excess of £100,000 for that.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like choosing venues. You can go, there's a massive wide range, and then that's not to say that the from like the smaller range can't do a good webinar or smaller event, but then definitely you're spending more as you get into sort of the larger, more complex and more functionality. I'm
just conscious of time, so I think we should probably move straight on to the next speaker.
Yeah, okay, so now Rob's gone through like all the possibilities of the technology. I think we really need to now focus on the very important part of compliance and what we can and can't offer. So I'm going to pass over to Caroline, who's an expert in this area.
Right, let's see how we're doing. I don't know, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
There we go, let's try.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, wrong one. Let's try this one. Don't want that screen. All right. Okay. Right. Okay, what I just really wanted to touch on very briefly is the consideration specifically for healthcare meetings. And one of the concerns we saw Delores bring up earlier in her presentation is, how do we ensure a virtual environment for the sponsor, for the exhibitor, meets their needs. And for healthcare meetings, as many of us know, when we're already organising a physical meeting, the compliance aspect is built in. And the same goes for within a virtual environment. One of the biggest nervousnesses I've seen in terms of sponsors going virtual is it compliant? And I think equally as an organiser is making sure we understand what we are providing is fit for purpose. So I guess the first place that I would generally start is what can we offer? I'm just going to try and make sure see if I can get this up to full screen for you. Sorry, 1 second. So first of all, I mean, it's a bit chicken and egg. You need to have that discussion with your sponsor. But before you have that discussion, you need to have an idea as an organizer, what is it you're actually offering? Is it that you're planning a webinar series? Is it that you're looking at something that can be topped and tailed with banners, advertising? Is it static content with some Q&A and meet the expert? Is it that full virtual event experience, either over a number of days or extended, as we are seeing, over actually a period of time, running sort of a 3 to 6 months of gradual release? So have that thought in your mind before you have the discussion with your sponsor, because there's no point in putting out there opportunities for them if in fact it's something you can't offer with what you've got. So I think, being aware that compliance applies for healthcare companies, but also for other sectors, because obviously compliance covers healthcare regulation, also, as we'll hear from Pritesh, cover things like data and GDPR. And I've just put up here an extract from the UK industry compliance code around digital materials. Now, there are lots of national codes out there, and when you get into international meetings with international audiences, you've got an awful lot of regulatory information to work your way through. So I would always come back, first of all, because as well as being what's put out there under the industry, the country protocol, is how the company and sponsor is applying that within their own organization. And ultimately, that is what is going to dictate your sponsor. So I would always say, don't go down that line of, it's some of the things that they're going to consider is, how are people, entering the platform? Is a secure registration? Are there personalized links? What's the platform security you're using? We've heard things around, people having concerns with Zoom. Some companies actually, banning Zoom because they worry about the download contents. Once the event's open, is it locked in? Back to Delores' part, being able to create within your environment company space that they can do their activities with in a controlled and secure environment. One of the questions I saw coming up earlier is, why use, for example, the OpenMeet platform versus Slido? One of the things that your sponsors often need is to ensure that they can moderate content. So having live Q&A that is immediately released without moderation, again, minefield. Your compliance regulator in the company is often, because it can't be pre-moderated, be very nervous about that. How have the attendees been validated? Are they healthcare professionals? And how do you know that they're a healthcare professional? Have you gathered that data beforehand? If you have a sponsor who is promoting a prescription-only product, so just don't second guess it. Look at and have that discussion with your sponsor. What's of interest to them? Some may be more interested in having a sponsored meet the expert. They may be interested in the exhibit, environment, depending again of what they're going to get out of that. And it's going to differ from company to company. Their policies, their protocols, what's of interest is going to vary. So have that discussion. What is likely to need, and again, as an organizer, you need to consider, if you put something out there and you've already mandated this is what it's going to be, but it doesn't enable that sponsor to be compliant, they're unlikely to support it. So some of the things in the healthcare environment that you need to consider being able for the company to keep safe. Some people might be familiar with the term Zinc codes. These are commercial product licensing codes that need to be out there and available to access if you're putting out promotional information. One-click access to prescribing information. Again, is that within the platform? I've mentioned about need for moderations, and Pritesh will talk a little bit more about data exchange. What permissions have you as an organizer allowed when capturing the registration data to enable you to share that with your sponsors afterwards? And again, back to the ROI question that I saw coming up in one of the Q&As is, what analytics are you gathering? How can that again be shared with your sponsors?
Caroline,
what options are you giving?
Caroline,
sorry, just very quickly there, the live broadcast and the engagement element. Sorry, I've rushed through these last ones a bit quickly due to time, but the full slide deck is available in the materials. Sorry, Rob, was that you I could hear?
I just had some comments that people can't see your slides advancing.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Oh. Let me just put this. Right. The slides are available, Rob, in the materials sections. Apologies, I had a slide sharing issue.
Yeah. Well, that's, yeah, I think it's really important that we look at the compliance first, because although companies have their own compliance teams, and Delores will have her own compliance teams and know what she can and can't do, I think it's really important that actually when we're creating these offerings and when we've got our blue sky thinking and thinking of the great value, that we actually also make sure that it's compliant. So thank you very much, Caroline. I think because of time, there have been some compliance questions on the live stream on the open audience, but I think we're going to go straight to Pritesh. If you want to unmute Pritesh and talk us through something that's really important for all of our exhibitors, which is going to be data and accessing of data and how we manage it.
Absolutely. I have some slides to share. Rob, would you enable me to share those slides, please?
You should be able to do that, Pritesh.
You'll just need to come out of Caroline to stop sharing her screen and then go on to Pritesh's. Perfect.
There we go. Perfect. Yeah, that's better. Awesome. Okay, yeah, so data. I'll skip my introduction. We've seen that. Do you see the next slide on data collection and virtual meetings?
Yep.
Awesome, excellent. So data collection is a really important step because now in the virtual world, we can collect data at any point between the registration opening to the event itself being online, broadcasted live. And there are so many opportunities for event organizers and for sponsors and exhibitors to already put out content for those that have already registered. So one of the things we're noticing is that those registrations that have already taken place and one of the sponsors or the exhibitors will be speaking at the online webinar or event or virtual platform, whichever one you may be using, can now consent to share their data with those exhibitors in advance or with those sponsors in advance. And this usually happens through the registration process. All your GDPR questions will be in there, and you can ask them things like, you know, I agree to receive content from sponsors and exhibitors pre-event, yes or no. I agree to receive content from sponsors and exhibitors during or post-event, yes or no. And those that say yes in that space enables now for the sponsors to go out and create a pre-recorded, almost like a introduction to what they're going to be talking about during the live event. And that's really important now because you see the growth of marketing the event in a slightly different way. Again, when we talk about the platforms, yes, Zoom has been the #1 platform and GoToMeeting has been another really good platform. And there are many more out there. There's Facebook, there's YouTube live feeds, etc. The platform isn't really going to make a difference on how you execute. What will make the difference is the choices the event organizer makes on who they're going to use for the chat, who they're going to use for the Q&As, the pollings, etc. And there are many tech companies out there that have this interactions and collaborations and synergies with other technology providers as well. One of the biggest misconceptions about Zoom is it needs to be downloaded. And the same misconception exists for GoToMeeting. That's actually not true. You can run Zoom through a web page using something called an SDK. And that's really useful for those event organizers out there that are really worried about, you know, their attendees having to download something. It's just knowing and understanding that that's not necessary. Also, things like, how does sponsors make their content available? There are now so many different ways you can do that, even through the live webinar here. You know, there are ways that I can actually change my settings and put sponsorship backgrounds similar to this, for example. And now my background has changed and I have a sponsor. And this could be all along here. There could be all your different sponsors, your gold sponsors, your platinum sponsors, and so on and so forth. So don't limit yourself to just webinars and to those platforms. Collecting data isn't new. We've been doing it for a very, very long time. It's just the evolution on what data we will now collect and how we will collect it. And the questions we want to ask about things like, can I share my data with all exhibitors or not? And things are changing in the virtual reality world. Some really cool tips and tricks is, don't be bound by the boundaries of Zoom inside of this window that you're viewing right now. You could be viewing the exact same window inside of a web page, and either side of the web page and to the top of the web page and to the bottom of the web page could be other content. And this is what we call integrations with Slido or any other chat service that's out there, including the one we're using today. And then you've also got things like the attendee list. You can be shown in that space. Any resources and documents could be shown in that space as well. Then we go a little bit more extreme, right? And for those of you that might do gaming, or those of you that might have children that game, you have an environment where you can move around and you can go to different buildings and go to different spaces like you would in the gaming world. In a similar format, you can have two doors which one enters into, again, inside of this web page, and they see 3 tracks. They would go into one of those tracks, and that might be a sponsored track, and that track can now be monitored or logged. Who went there? What did they click on? What resources did they look at? You could have a chat inside of that session as well, inside of that space, and that could be a randomly generated session, so you get to speak to random people. It could be by your choice that you get to speak to somebody. You could also witness the pre-recorded video that we sent to those individuals as well, pre-event, again in that session before the session starts. And then as the session starts in real time, the video changes for that seminar in that virtual room. And then as you come out and go into the next session, again, similar things can be placed into that space. And again, we can log all of that going in of one room, coming out of the other room, etc., and log the times. Previously, we experienced that was really annoying for delegates because it was intrusive. We had to scan them, or we started using RFID, and the data in RFID wasn't as accurate. Now, the question will come, how do we know that the person was actually interested in that content? And that's the real area of data analysis that people are looking at right now, particularly technology companies who are logging this data. Is it relevant that somebody went in for 2 minutes into that track A and then left again? Should I still be able to contact them? Is that legitimate interest in that area if they only stayed for 2 minutes and went somewhere else? Probably not. And that's the kind of things that you want to start questioning when you're seeing this kind of content and reports coming back on who went into what session and how long they stayed there for. Compliance is obviously really, really important. GDPR, asking the right questions, ensuring that you have provided them the opportunity to opt out, opt in to receiving this content, right? You just cannot have it ticked by default. They need to opt into those things. Making sure that the attendees need to register in order to attend. That's really important, because one of the ways you can actually log data is by the email address. Okay, so we have to know who registered in order to log that individual, and in order to give back the event organizer and ultimately the exhibitors and the sponsors the content of that human being, so their first name, their family name, their address, all of that kind of stuff. And that's again going to be really important when you're doing the registration process. Recording the details. Now, it's really important that we understand, where are we going to record that detail that we're collecting? Many associations will already have a CRM system, and my recommendation is to go to the CRM system and send the link from there to register to the event. Many organizations today are using Zoom in order to do that, and then I wonder, have they asked the question if they can take that first name, family name, company, job title, email address from Zoom, and next time, because they want to use a different platform to experience, do they have the consent to take the data from Zoom and put it into GoToMeeting, for example? And those are the questions you want to ask yourselves, because you really want to keep the data in one place, so you're not having to keep asking the question, can I transfer your data to Zoom? Can I transfer your data to da-da-da? The communication always happens from the CRM system or the membership management system, and then by human's choice, they actually give their own data via the Zoom platform or via whatever platform you are choosing to implement. I covered this a little bit. Moving the data from Zoom into other platforms will again require you to ask those questions to those people that have registered. As a technology company, we find ourselves constantly educating what's possible. And one of the things that we've always heard back in terms of feedback is, what do you want? Like, what can you do? Like, I didn't know that was possible. And it's really talking to the suppliers of tech in order to understand, how can you do this? And be really creative would be my #1 suggestion. Don't be bound by what you have seen or experienced. We've already done events where we have provided login, enabled someone to go in, they see a presentation before they even get into the webinar. And all of that is opportunity for a sponsor, an exhibitor, all the different stakeholders in order for them to do that. And of course, you can collect any data along the way as they get into the webinar as well. So you could ask them all of the ideas on what's missing for them right now, just before they attend and just before we broadcast the session itself. A couple of other things that we've utilized in the online space is...
Pritesh, hi, it's Rob. Sorry, we're going to have to move on and do an initial wrap up, and we'll come back to you shortly. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
We're just out of time. We are going to extend Q&A up until around 11:15, as we've had a lot to get through this morning. A couple of other things before we move on to that. We do have a last question in the poll. Our sessions are based on what we design the sessions around what people want to know. So we'd like to know, please, what other topics you would like to see us discuss in these webinars. And that's in an ideas question on See Open Meet. You'll see the ideas section along the bottom of the platform. Thanks so much to our speakers, Delores, Caroline, Pritesh, Jason in the background, and to my co-host, Gabrielle, and of course you, our audience, for attending. Our next webinar will be Friday the 29th of May, where we'll be discussing monetization of virtual events. We will send a follow-up email to the link of the recording of the session and the links to slides for those who opted in. For those that didn't, they'll be available on the events page of the Brightelm website from Monday onwards. I'm going to hand over now to Gabrielle for the first question.
Thank you, and there are some really excellent questions. So many. There are a few quick fire ones that are to do with general stuff. So someone asked the optimum time slot for speakers in virtually. So I'll put that open to the floor. Any comments?
What was the question? Sorry.
The optimum time for speakers to speak during a virtual event.
I would say it depends on the content, whether you're doing a panel discussion or whether you are doing a one-person, one-to-many broadcast. In terms of a total length of time, I wouldn't go more than an hour at one go without breaks. What do other people think?
I second that, but I also think that it's going to very much depend on the cognitive space and the cognitive, by this I mean, previously we want to invite people because people are coming because we have the best band, or it's their favorite band, or something is happening during the welcome reception. Now it's very much focused on what is the meaning of the event, the topic. How much does it mean to people? And that cognitive space will have them be engaged. Some people will be constantly engaged for hours on end. I'm one of them, and others will not. But again, it will come down to the content, like you said, Rob.
Yeah, thank you.
I would say it depends really on the format of the virtual event. I think live broadcasting, you're absolutely right. That's sort of 1 hour maximum time. But if you've got on-demand content and you're broadcasting live a certain surgical procedure, people have the opportunity to sit and watch it through or come back to it in bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, so I think this is exactly all very, and I agree with everybody, it's very much content dependent. I think definitely if you've got a medical procedure, someone would probably sit through the whole whole surgery, and then it might be a bit shorter for others. It's always good to ask the audience of what, if you know someone who you're going to be streaming to, who will give an honest opinion, it's always good to ask them in advance. Rob, do you have the next question? You're on mute.
I was using the fantastic spacebar function, but it didn't work for some reason. We're just going to try and keep people's questions relevant to the topic. I know there's lots of questions which people have, but they will try and answer those in different relevant webinars. There was a question around budgets. And thinking again about this from a sponsorship point of view, Delores, I'd like to come to you with this first. If you were to spend £5,000 on a face-to-face event, would you generally look to pay the same if the same event was held virtually? Does that hold the same value for you?
I think it's not about the value. I think that there's different assumptions there. So it might actually have more reach than we would expect. However, from a budgetary point, in giving the virtual, you don't have all the logistical costs, you don't have all the transport costs, etc. So you would expect that a virtual event is less expensive than a face-to-face one. And it's nothing to do with the speaker or the speaker fee that you will have to pay, because that probably remains the same. It's really to do with logistics towards the event, etc. Even if there are certain costs to set it up in a virtual environment, I would still expect that it would be lower than a real face-to-face.
We will be just looking at things like that in the next session on the monetization, because it's really important. It's important to talk about money. Caroline, from a PCO's perspective, I guess I'd like to ask you, how would you answer that question on the value of face-to-face environment or face-to-face opportunities rather than live? Sorry, rather than against digital, sorry.
I think it really depends on what you're offering. And we've talked a lot about different formats. Different formats allow different, I was going to say quality is the wrong word, but a different breadth of sponsor involvement. So I think, again, it depends on what your offering is. Also, as we know, you can charge, and the markets will dictate to a degree, if you're, what a sponsor's prepared to pay for an audience of X at a cardiology event may well be very different to what, a sponsor's prepared to pay at a pediatric event. So I think you've got to, again, think very carefully of your value proposition, and you'll know that from your physical events. So I think it's back to, again, defining the value of what you can offer and talking it through with your sponsor to see because ultimately what's the value? It's what somebody's prepared to pay for it. You have to work out where do I start? I look at what's actually going to be the cost of running this. If I'm putting on a format that is all bells and whistles over a 6-month window, and it's going to cost, for the platform, 10,000 and an extra 20,000 of manpower hours to populate and coordinate that content, then I know what I'm going to be looking to try and get back, plus the value. So I think it's really taking a lot of things, as you would for a physical event, but speak to your sponsors, get an idea of where they perceive the value, and be clear on what it is you're selling. Great. Gabrielle, over to you for the next question.
I'm going to ask Pritesh the next question. It's how to direct virtual delegates to exhibitors and exhibitions. What's like the best practice?
So there's a few ways to execute that best practice. One of them is going to be dependent on how you execute the session. If you're doing it like we're doing today, it would probably be through the email link, where you would give the link to the web page for all exhibitors. It might also be that you're hosting this existing webinar inside of a web page and you're listing all the exhibitors at the bottom already. And we know who's logged in. That was the most important thing, right? To be able to track people, they need to be able to log in. So those are the key ways to do it. In a platform like this, I would probably put another reminder on the chat that we're using over the other side, and maybe even in the Zoom webinar chat here, links, important links or resources, depending on how you want to call that. And that doesn't have to just be to the exhibitors or the sponsors pages. It could also be to content that they have pre-recorded or put together in a PDF or a prospectus.
Brilliant, thank you. And don't forget, gamification as well is something that you can do virtually on different stands, getting people to go to different stands depending on what kind of platform and virtual exhibition you have. So that's always
exactly. And the addition to that way of doing it is you can actually track who clicked on what sponsors icons and what content they downloaded. A really good, if I draw a timeline and the event is over here, if you have a pre-event exploration and you can go into the different rooms already with pre-recorded content, you can track how much of your existing registrations, what they were interested in. And that will really tailor the content for the real-time event. Again, it's how you're going to implement it and use those resources. Brilliant,
thank you. Rob, for the next question?
Yeah, I think we've got time for one more after this, Gabrielle. I'd actually like to bring back in a conversation which Caroline and I were having yesterday on GDPR and compliance. And I'd like to come to Caroline first and then Pritesh on this. And it's about actually what information can we give sponsors on attendees, on people that visit, without getting dragged across the coals by the Information Commissioner's Office. Caroline, to you first.
I think the one area that you need to be, most of us I think are dealing first of all in a B2B environment. So that's the first thing to look at. Are we B2B? Are we B2C? Because that ultimately again changes pretty much, a lot of the landscape. The one area to be most sensitive with is email addresses. That again can vary not just within GDPR but country to country, so you have to be aware of things like if you've got a German audience, you need a double opt-in for email sharing. So I think in that sense, emails, probably the addresses are the most sensitive. But if you're in a B2B environment, you have the options of consents, you have the options of legitimate interest. I would only ever use legitimate interest in a B2B environment, not in a B2C. And I would think I would be reasonably comfortable in data transfer if, under a legitimate interest, if you have put certain caveats, you know who your audience is, you put certain caveats up front, and it's not necessarily data that you are sharing, in terms of email address. Email address, I would go consent, opt-in only. But otherwise, you have the 6 GDPR, legitimate reasons that you can share data.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, I think from
oh, sorry.
When you're going through the process of collecting data, I think we need to look at it in a slightly different way now that we're in an online platform. For example, we want to be asking speakers, are we okay to share your content, your slides on the website, on Dropbox, on whatever platform you're going to be putting or making available this content. Also, as delegates will normally register, those options on the registration form will probably be about the same, if not in more detail, if you're choosing to do those pre-event snippets in advance before the actual event takes place.
Brilliant, thank you. And our last question, I'm going to go back to the one about hybrid exhibitions. So we've talked about your virtual exhibitions, and I think they might be straightforward. Rob, how possible and what should you think about when trying to do a hybrid exhibition? That's when you have a virtual exhibition and an on-site one.
What should you think about? Interestingly, I'm actually planning this for a client right now. The important thing from a sponsoring exhibitors' point of view is ensuring they have the right resources available at the live event, but getting them to recognise that the people at the live event shouldn't be the ones who are interacting with the online audience, and to make sure they've got enough resources to handle any inquiries that might come from the online audience. And the second thing is to keep it as simple as you possibly can. So you'll see when you start looking at various platforms, there's lots of functionality for exhibitors, and like with anything new, start small, start with limited functionality, and when you find something which works well for you and your community, start to build on that. Don't go for all the bells and whistles at once, because what will happen is you will need to spend more time on exhibitor support and customer service, which you might not be prepared for.
Great, thank you very much.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you very much for everybody who is still with us online. We're going to close the meeting down now, and we will send out additional materials on Monday. Thank you for attending.
Great,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye.
Bye.